November 18, 2003. Pingyu County, Hunan Province, Central China. Just after sunrise, the quiet routine of a rural police station was shattered when a teenage boy burst through the front doors. He looked terrified. His clothes were dirty, wrinkled, and soaked with sweat. His face was pale. His hands shook so violently he had to grab the edge of a desk just to stay standing. For several seconds, he couldn't speak. The officers in the room stared at him, confused. Boys his age sometimes came to report stolen bicycles or school fights, but this was different. Something was deeply wrong. Finally, through ragged breaths, the boy forced out a sentence that froze the room. "There are people being killed." At first, the officers assumed he was exaggerating. Maybe a fight had broken out in his village. Maybe someone had been injured. But then the boy continued. He told them he had just escaped from a house where multiple people had been murdered, and the killer was still inside. Within minutes, police vehicles were racing down the narrow rural roads toward the village the boy had described. The further they drove, the quieter the officers became. The boy sat in the back seat, trembling, staring out the window as if afraid someone might appear behind them. When the police finally arrived at the location, they immediately sensed something was wrong. The house stood at the edge of a small farming settlement. The front gate was half open. No one was outside. One officer pushed the door open slowly. The smell hit them first, a thick, metallic odor that every experienced officer instantly recognized. Blood. Inside the house, the scene was almost impossible to comprehend. Bodies lay scattered across the rooms, some on the floor, some slumped against furniture. The victims had been attacked with extreme brutality. There were signs of a violent struggle everywhere. Overturned chairs, broken objects, blood smeared across the walls and floor. For a moment, even the officers stood frozen. This wasn't a normal homicide. It looked more like a massacre, but the most disturbing detail was still ahead. As investigators moved deeper into the house, they discovered something that sent a chill through everyone present. The killer hadn't been targeting just one person. He had slaughtered an entire family. Men, women, even children. The brutality suggested rage, but also something colder: control, planning, and whoever had done this clearly had no fear of killing again. Outside, villagers began gathering in frightened silence as police sealed off the area. Rumors spread quickly. Some believed it must have been a robbery. Others whispered about revenge. But the terrified boy who had escaped knew the truth. He had seen the killer, and the description he gave investigators would soon point them toward a man whose name would become one of the most feared in modern Chinese criminal history: a drifter, predator, a man responsible for one of the deadliest serial killing sprees the country had ever seen. His name was Xinhai, and this house in Pingyu County was only one stop in a trail of blood that stretched across multiple provinces. Long before the police in Pingyu County discovered the massacre inside that quiet rural house, the man responsible had already spent years drifting across China. His name was Xinhai, and almost nothing about his early life suggested he would one day become one of the most feared serial killers in modern Chinese history. Xinhai was born in 1968 in a poor rural village in Zhemadian, Hunan Province. Like many children growing up in the Chinese countryside during that time, his life was simple and harsh. His family were farmers. Money was always scarce. From an early age, Yang showed signs that he was different from the other children in the village. Neighbors later remembered him as quiet, withdrawn, and often distant. He didn't play much with other kids. He preferred to wander alone. At school, however, Yang was not considered unintelligent. Some teachers even believed he had the ability to do well academically. But something else seemed to be building beneath the surface: resentment. By his teenage years, that resentment had begun turning into anger. Yang developed a reputation for getting into trouble. Small thefts, fights, arguments with neighbors. Nothing that seemed extraordinary at first, just another troubled young man growing up in a difficult environment. But there was a deeper pattern forming. Yang didn't seem to care about rules. or consequences. As he grew older, he began leaving home for long periods, traveling from province to province doing temporary labor work, construction sites, small factories, farms. These drifting jobs allowed him to disappear easily from one place and reappear somewhere else. To most people, he looked like just another migrant worker, quiet, unremarkable, forgettable, but the reality was far more disturbing. In the mid-1990s, Yang was arrested several times for theft and other minor crimes. Each time, he served short prison sentences before being released back into society. Instead of reforming him, prison seemed to deepen his anger. Former cellmates later recalled that Yang often spoke bitterly about society, complaining that life had treated him unfairly, that people looked down on him, that he had nothing to lose. By the time he was released again in the late 1990s, something inside him had changed. The petty thief was gone. What replaced him was something far darker. Yang began traveling constantly through rural provinces like Hunan, Anhui, Shandong, and Hebei. He avoided big cities and preferred isolated villages where homes were far apart and security was almost non-existent. These places had no surveillance cameras, few police patrols, and most families slept with their doors unlocked. For Yang, they were perfect hunting grounds. His method was terrifyingly simple. He would wander through villages at night, watching houses, waiting for the right moment. Then he would break in after everyone was asleep. Armed with basic tools, sometimes a hammer, sometimes a shovel, sometimes just a brick, he would attack his victims without warning. Entire families were slaughtered. Men, women, children. Sometimes the killings were accompanied by robbery. Sometimes they were not. The attacks seemed random, but they followed a chilling pattern. Yang would strike in one province, then disappear hundreds of kilometers away before police even connected the cases. For years, local authorities treated each massacre as an isolated crime. They had no idea the same man was responsible. No one realized that across central China, a single predator was leaving behind a growing trail of bodies. By the early 2000s, the number of victims had already climbed into the dozens. But young Xinhai was only getting started. And soon, one survivor would finally expose the monster hiding in the darkness. When investigators first arrived at the massacre scene in Pingyu County, their immediate task was simple, but overwhelming. They needed to understand what had happened inside that house. The rooms were sealed off. Forensic teams began carefully documenting every detail: blood patterns on the walls, overturned furniture, broken household objects scattered across the floor. The attack had been brutal and chaotic, but it wasn't completely random. Investigators quickly noticed something strange. Despite the violence, there were almost no signs that valuable items had been taken. A small amount of cash was missing, but most belongings were still inside the home. If robbery had been the motive, it didn't make much sense. Meanwhile, outside the house, villagers gathered in frightened groups, whispering among themselves. In rural communities like this, violent crime was extremely rare. Most people knew each other. Disputes were usually small and personal, which meant police initially believed the killer was likely someone local, someone who knew the victims. Officers began interviewing neighbors. Had anyone seen strangers in the area? Had the family been involved in any conflicts recently? At first, nothing seemed unusual, but one person's testimony changed the direction of the investigation. The teenage boy who had escaped the house. Once he calmed down enough to speak clearly, the boy described what he had seen the night of the attack. He had woken up suddenly to strange noises, footsteps, then the sounds of a violent struggle. When he peeked from his room, he saw a man moving through the house, attacking family members one by one. The killer wasn't wearing a mask, but the room had been dark. The boy could only remember fragments of the man's appearance. Medium height, thin build, rough clothing, like a laborer. It wasn't much to go on. But the most important detail was this: the boy had never seen the man before. That single statement changed everything. If the killer wasn't someone from the village, then how had he found this house? Why had he chosen this family? And more importantly, where had he gone afterward? Investigators widened their search to nearby towns and highways, checking records of migrant workers who had recently passed through the area. But the trail quickly went cold. Weeks passed, then months, and soon another horrifying discovery emerged. Hundreds of kilometers away, in another province, police were investigating a disturbingly similar massacre. A rural home, multiple victims, attacked at night while sleeping, blunt force trauma. At first, the connection seemed unlikely. China was vast, and violent crimes sometimes shared similar patterns. But as detectives compared case files from different provinces, the similarities became impossible to ignore. The same method, the same targets, the same terrifying brutality. One by one, old unsolved cases began resurfacing. Massacres that had happened years earlier, in villages scattered across central China. What if they were all connected? What if the killer responsible for the Pingyu massacre wasn't just a murderer, but something far worse? A serial killer who had been traveling silently across provinces for years. And if that theory was true, then somewhere out there, the man responsible was still walking free, still searching for his next house, still waiting for night to fall. For months, investigators struggled to understand what they were dealing with. The massacre in Pingyu County was horrifying, but it wasn't unique anymore. Across central China, police departments began quietly comparing case files. At first, the similarities seemed coincidental, but the deeper they looked, the more disturbing the pattern became. Rural homes, families attacked in the middle of the night, victims killed with blunt force tools, hammers, bricks, or heavy objects found near the scene. Little or no property stolen. Entire households wiped out. Some cases dated back years. They had occurred in different provinces: Hunan, Anhui, Shandong, Hebei. Different police departments, different investigators. For years, no one had realized they might all be connected, until one small clue changed everything. At one crime scene, investigators discovered something the killer had accidentally left behind: a worn-out travel bag. Inside the bag were a few simple items: clothing, basic tools, and something far more valuable to detectives: a piece of identification linked to a migrant worker. The name on the document was Xinhai. At first, it didn't seem extraordinary. China had millions of migrant workers moving from province to province each year. But when investigators began digging into Yang's background, the pieces began falling into place. Xinhai had no stable home, no permanent job. For years, he had been drifting across the exact regions where the massacres had occurred: construction sites, temporary labor camps, small factories. Each time he stayed somewhere briefly, then disappeared. When police checked older records, they discovered something even more alarming. Yang had been arrested multiple times in the past for theft. His fingerprints were already in the system. And when forensic teams compared those fingerprints to evidence recovered from several crime scenes, the results sent shockwaves through the investigation. They matched. Suddenly, dozens of unsolved murders across multiple provinces had a single suspect. A man who had managed to stay invisible simply because no one realized the crimes were connected. Police quickly issued a nationwide manhunt. But tracking Xinhai was not easy. He had no phone, no registered address, no predictable routine. He moved constantly, blending in with the millions of migrant laborers traveling across China. Weeks passed with no sign of him, but investigators now understood something chilling. Yang didn't kill for money. The robberies had only been a cover. The true motivation seemed far darker: violence itself. And if they didn't find him soon, the killings would almost certainly continue. Then, in November 2003, police finally received a tip. A suspicious laborer had been seen staying in a small village in Hebei province. His behavior made neighbors uneasy. He kept to himself. He avoided conversations, and he often wandered outside late at night. Officers moved in quietly. They surrounded the small house where the man was staying. When police forced the door open, the suspect inside barely resisted. He simply looked at them calmly, almost as if he had been expecting this moment. The man they arrested was Xinhai. and the investigation that followed would reveal a killing spree so large, it shocked the entire nation. When police arrested Yang Xinhai in November 2003, they expected a difficult interrogation. Serial killers often deny everything. They lie. They manipulate investigators. They pretend to be victims of circumstance. But Yang Xinhai did something that shocked the detectives almost immediately. He confessed, calmly, without hesitation. Inside the interrogation room, Yang sat across from investigators with almost no emotion on his face. There was no panic, no anger, no visible fear, only an unsettling calm. When officers asked him about the murders in Pingyu County, he simply nodded. Yes, he said. He admitted he had entered the house at night. He described how he attacked the victims, and then he began describing other killings. At first, detectives believed he might be exaggerating. But Yang continued listing locations, villages, provinces, specific houses, specific nights, details that had never been released publicly. Investigators quickly realized something horrifying. Many of the cases he described matched unsolved murders that had occurred across central China over the previous several years. Entire families murdered in their sleep. Homes left soaked in blood. Communities left terrified. Case after case. One by one, Yang Xinhai admitted to them all. According to his confession, the killings had started in the late 1990s. After years of drifting through the countryside as a migrant laborer, Yang had developed a deep hatred towards society. He believed the world had treated him unfairly. He felt invisible, powerless, and the murders made him feel powerful. His method rarely changed. He would enter rural villages late at night. He searched for homes that looked vulnerable, houses with weak doors, homes located far from neighbors, families already asleep. Then he would break in quietly. Once inside, he attacked without warning, sometimes using a hammer, sometimes a shovel, sometimes tools he found inside the house itself. His victims never had time to defend themselves, and the violence was relentless. Men, women, children, no one was spared. When investigators asked him why he had killed so many people, his answer was disturbingly simple. I wanted revenge against society. There was no deeper explanation, no remorse, no sign of guilt. By the end of the interrogation, Yang Xinhai had confessed to 67 murders and dozens of assaults across multiple provinces. Some investigators believed the real number might have been even higher. The scale of the crimes shocked the entire country. China had rarely seen a serial killer operating on such a massive scale. For years, Yang had moved silently from village to village, leaving behind a trail of devastation that no one had realized was connected. And now the truth was finally clear. The quiet migrant worker who blended into crowds had been one of the deadliest killers in modern Chinese history. But the story of Yang Xinhai was not over yet, because the final chapter, the trial and its aftermath, would leave the nation asking a disturbing question. How had one man managed to kill so many people for so long without being stopped? When the full scale of Yang Xinhai's crimes became public, the reaction across China was immediate and overwhelming. For years, families in quiet rural villages had lived with unanswered questions. Why had entire households been slaughtered in the middle of the night? Why did the attacks seem so random? Why had the killer never been found? Now suddenly the truth was revealed. One man had been responsible for it all. Yang Xinhai, a drifting migrant worker who had moved silently between provinces, had confessed to 67 murders and dozens of assaults between the late 1990s and 2003. Entire families, men, women, and children, many of them attacked while sleeping in their own homes. The brutality of the crimes shocked the entire country. Chinese media quickly began referring to him as the monster killer. In early 2004, Yang Xinhai was brought to trial. The proceedings were brief. The evidence against him was overwhelming: forensic evidence, witness testimony, and his own detailed confessions. Investigators had also connected him to numerous crime scenes across several provinces. During the trial, Yang showed almost no emotion. He did not deny the killings. He did not attempt to defend himself. And perhaps most chilling of all, he showed no remorse for the people he had murdered. The court found him guilty of multiple counts of murder. The sentence was immediate: death. On February 14, 2004, Yang Xinhai was executed. With that, one of the deadliest serial killing sprees in modern Chinese history officially came to an end. But even after his death, the case left behind disturbing questions. How had one man managed to commit so many murders across multiple provinces without being caught for years? Part of the answer lay in the environment where the crimes occurred. Many of the attacks happened in remote rural villages where homes were isolated and security was minimal. Surveillance cameras were almost non-existent at the time. Yang also moved constantly. As a migrant worker, he blended easily into the millions of laborers traveling across the country each year. To most people, he was just another quiet stranger passing through. No one imagined he was responsible for a growing trail of massacres. The case also exposed a deeper issue. For years, police departments in different provinces had investigated similar murders, but the cases were never connected. Each crime was treated as an isolated tragedy. It wasn't until much later that investigators realized they had been hunting the same killer all along. Today, the story of Yang Xinhai remains one of the most chilling true crime cases in Chinese history, not only because of the number of victims, but because of how ordinary the killer appeared. He didn't stand out. He didn't draw attention. He simply moved quietly through the darkness. And for years, no one realized the monster walking through their villages was the man responsible for dozens of murders. Even now, the case leaves a haunting question. How many times did Yang Xinhai walk past people during the day, while planning who would die that night?
Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more videos.